Miguel Rodríguez was a man forged by the asphalt and dust of Tijuana. At 45, his calloused hands and sun-beaten face told the story of a lifetime behind the wheel of a truck, crossing borders and deserts. He was a silent figure, a man of few words who believed in the honesty of hard work, a philosophy that kept his head down in a city governed by unwritten laws and the omnipresent shadow of the cartel. His routine was a cycle of highways, freight yards, and the modest home he fought to maintain. Stories like Miguel's are a portrait of silent courage that is often lost in the noise of the world, and that is why I need your help to continue telling them. If you believe narratives like this deserve to be heard, please subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Our goal is to reach 1,000 subscribers so that more stories of anonymous bravery can reach the world. The true center of Miguel's universe was not the road, but his 18-year-old daughter, Sophia. Since his wife passed away years ago, every mile he drove, every load he delivered was to ensure that Sophia would have a different future than his, far from the silent brutality that engulfed Tijuana. She was his antithesis, vibrant, full of dreams of becoming a doctor, and with a smile that seemed to defy the aridity of the surrounding landscape. Their relationship was the pillar that supported Miguel's life, a bond forged in unconditional love and the promise of protection. He saw in her the personification of hope, a seed of purity that he needed to cultivate and protect in a soil poisoned by the greed and violence that surrounded them. On a warm and suffocating night, typical of the border, Miguel sat at the kitchen table, watching Sophia hunched over her anatomy books. The smell of cooked beans hung in the air, mixed with the distant sound of sirens, a constant soundtrack of the city. She looked up, tired but with a glint of determination, and began to talk about college, about the lives she wanted to save. Miguel just listened, his heart swelling with a painful pride. In that moment, he was not a hardened trucker, but just a father, absorbing his daughter's presence like a thirsty man drinks water. He knew, with a terrifying clarity, that there was nothing in the world he wouldn't do to preserve that sparkle in her eyes, a beacon of innocence in an ocean of darkness. The presence of the Tijuana cartel was like the air they breathed, invisible yet essential to the perverse functioning of the city. For men like Miguel, survival depended on a careful dance, a ballet of evasion and tacit submission. He saw the halcones, the young cartel lookouts, on every corner, their empty gazes recording every movement. He heard the whispers in the truck yards about drivers who disappeared after asking the wrong questions or refusing the right favors. The cartel's power lay not only in its explicit violence, but in the paranoia it installed, an invisible leash around the neck of every citizen. It was a corrupt system that fed on the silence of good men, and Miguel, like so many others, paid his daily tax of fear just to ensure one more day of peace for Sophia. Life on the road had taught Miguel more than just the mechanics of his truck. He knew the dirt arteries that cut through the desert like the back of his hand, smuggling routes used for generations before the cartel claimed them for themselves. He understood the logistics of transport, the blind spots in surveillance, and the non-verbal language of men who lived on the edge of the law. These skills, acquired through decades of honest work, were dangerous knowledge. He shared a sense of camaraderie with other drivers, a silent brotherhood united by shared danger and long hours of solitude. They exchanged information about dangerous roads, corrupt police checkpoints, and, in hushed tones, about the loads that were best refused, no matter the price offered. One day, in a dusty truck yard, Miguel witnessed a scene that chilled his blood. A driver, an acquaintance of his named Hector, was being dragged behind a container by two grim-faced men. There were no screams, just a muffled sound, and the terrified look in Hector's eyes that met Miguel's for an instant. No one intervened. The other drivers looked away, suddenly busy with their tires and engines, feigning a collective blindness. Miguel felt a knot in his stomach. The danger, which had once been an abstract threat, now had a familiar face. That night he struggled to fall asleep, the image of terror in Hector's eyes haunting his mind, reinforcing his constant fear for his daughter's safety. That anxiety deepened when Sophia, jubilant, announced she had been accepted into a preparatory program at a university in Guadalajara. The joy on her face was so pure and radiant that for a moment it dispelled the darkness accumulating in Miguel's heart. He hugged her tightly, pride mixed with a paralyzing fear. Guadalajara seemed like another world, a safe haven far from the clutches of Tijuana. Her departure, however, meant that Miguel would need more money, and fast. The need to pay for Sophia's education and move placed him in a vulnerable position, a worry that began to corrode his usual caution, making him more susceptible to the jobs he had always strived to avoid. On a particularly hot morning, Miguel set off for what was supposed to be another routine delivery, transporting electronics to the north. As the sun rose over the desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, he allowed himself a rare moment of peace. His thoughts were on Sophia, on the bright future that lay before her. He imagined her in a white coat, safe and fulfilled, far from the dust and danger. That image was his sanctuary, the force that drove him through the long, lonely hours on the road. That brief instant of hope, however, was just the calm before the storm. Fate, cruel and relentless, had already placed a detour in his path from which he could never return, an encounter that would transform the quiet trucker into a legend forged in the fires of vengeance. The proposition came in an isolated truck yard, under the merciless gaze of the midday sun. Two men, their faces devoid of any emotion, approached Miguel as he inspected his tires. The offer was direct: transport a shipment of chemicals to the south. It was no ordinary cargo. The acrid smell and the secrecy surrounding the delivery made it clear they were precursors for drug processing. The amount offered was exorbitant, more than he would need to ensure Sophia's safety and education for years. For an instant, Miguel hesitated, the image of his daughter's future flashing in his mind. But the face of Hector, terrified, and the primal fear of becoming entangled in the cartel's deadly embrace, spoke louder. In a firm but respectful voice, he refused, claiming his truck was not suitable. He tried to walk away, but the air grew heavy, thick with menace. Miguel's refusal was not met with violence, but with a silence that was far worse. One of the men, the older one, stepped forward, a thin, cruel smile on his lips. He didn't raise his voice, but his words cut through the air like glass. "That's a shame," he said. "El Verdugo doesn't like his requests to be ignored. He believes everyone in Tijuana should cooperate for the good of the community." The mention of Ricardo Morales' name, the sadistic chief of operations for the cartel, was like a physical blow. The threat was not just to Miguel, but to everything he loved. They left him there, standing by his truck, his heart hammering against his ribs. He felt a chill run down his spine, despite the heat, a terrible premonition that his refusal would not be the end of the matter, but the beginning of a nightmare. The nightmare materialized 2 days later. After a short trip, Miguel returned home, his heart lighter, carrying a small gift for Sophia. He opened the door, calling her name, expecting to hear her laughter from her room. Instead, he was met with a sepulchral, unnatural silence. The house was in disarray, a clear sign of a violent struggle. A primitive dread seized him as he ran to her room, and there he found her. The sight broke something fundamental within Miguel, shattering his soul into a million pieces. The air escaped his lungs in a groan of pure agony. The world around him dissolved into a blur of incomprehensible pain. He fell to his knees, the scream trapped in his throat, turning into a silent sob that racked his entire body. In the days that followed, Miguel's grief morphed into something darker and sharper. The raw pain gave way to a cold, crystalline fury. a black flame that consumed every ounce of fear and hesitation he had ever had. The system he had tried to respect, the police who were supposed to protect, were just cogs in the cartel's machine. There would be no justice. In that void, a new certainty took shape, a purpose born from absolute loss. He would no longer be a passive victim. They had taken his world, and he, in return, would show them what a man with nothing left to lose is capable of. It's incredible how pain can become a motor for action, and I know many of you watching understand that. If Miguel's journey from victim to avenger resonates with you, know that your support, your subscription, allows me to continue giving a voice to these transformations. The simple, hard-working trucker died along with his daughter. In his place, a strategist was born, a ghost driven by a single, overwhelming mission. Grief did not paralyze him. It focused him. Every tear shed became fuel for the engine of his revenge. His intimate knowledge of the roads, of peak hours, of weaknesses in the cartel's security, once the tools of his trade, now became the arsenal for his private war. He began to watch, to plan, his mind mapping the cartel's logistics with terrifying clarity. The man who once only wanted to go, unnoticed now, planned to strike at the heart of the organization that destroyed his life. His journey would not be for redemption or for justice in the noble sense of the word, but for a brutal and final reckoning. Miguel's transformation into a ghost began with the dismantling of his former life. He sold the small house that had once held Sophia's laughter. Each object sold a stab to his heart, and at the same time, a link broken with his painful past. The money, stained with memory, became the seed capital for his war. His truck became his home, his sanctuary, and his headquarters. Living on the road, he became an anonymous figure, one face among thousands of other drivers, his presence as transient as the white lines on the highway. This nomadic existence was the perfect camouflage. He was erasing himself from the world, cutting all anchors so that when he acted, there would be nothing the cartel could use against him, nothing more to lose. The following weeks were an exercise in patience and methodical observation. Miguel immersed himself in the cartel's routine, becoming part of the scenery in the freight yards and at the gas stations that served as nodes in the organization's logistical network. He watched from afar, his trained trucker's eye catching details others would ignore, the arrogance of the guards escorting the money trucks, the shift change that always occurred with a 10-minute delay, the specific models of the armored vehicles and their apparent vulnerabilities. He wrote nothing down, committing everything to memory, building a complex mental map of the cartel's operations. His pain transformed into an absolute focus, a lens through which he saw the world only in terms of weaknesses and opportunities. For his plan, he needed an ally, someone he could trust in a world where loyalty was a rare and dangerous commodity. His choice fell on Javier, an old friend, the owner of a mechanic shop on the outskirts of Tijuana. Javier was a genius, with engines and metal, but a man broken by fear, having seen the cartel's brutality firsthand. Miguel found him amidst car carcasses, his hands dirty with grease. He didn't reveal the whole plan, just enough to arouse his friend's curiosity and fear. He spoke of the need to disappear, to modify his truck for a long journey, a one-way trip. He needed help, and Javier was the only one he could think of. Javier's reaction was one of pure terror. His eyes widened and he shook his head, wiping his hands on a rag, as if trying to wipe away the conversation itself. "Are you crazy, Miguel?" he whispered, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "Challenge those people? They aren't men. They're demons. They killed your daughter. What do you think they'll do to you? To me, if they find out?" Javier begged him to reconsider, to take what he had left and flee as far as possible, not to water the seed of grief with more blood. Javier's fear was palpable, a reflection of the terror the cartel instilled in the entire community, a power built on the certainty that any act of defiance would be punished with total annihilation. Miguel used no threats or promises of money. Instead, he touched the wound he knew they both shared. "Do you remember your cousin Carlos?" Miguel asked, his voice low and laden with a shared pain. "Remember how they left him in the desert over a meaningless debt?" The mention of Carlos made Javier flinch. The memory of that loss, an injustice he had swallowed in, silence for years, still haunted him. "They take everything from us, Javier," Miguel continued. "Our family, our peace, our dignity. I'm not asking you to fight my war. I'm asking you to help me find the only peace I have left. They can't take anything more from me." That plea from one broken man to another shattered Javier's resistance. With reluctance and a deep-seated fear, Javier agreed. Under the cover of night, they transformed the workshop into a secret shipyard for Miguel's weapon of revenge. The work was meticulous and dangerous. Javier, with his almost artistic skill, reinforced the truck's chassis to withstand impacts, welded hidden compartments under the floorboards, so perfectly integrated they would be invisible to a casual inspection. The most crucial part was the installation of a dual electrical system, including a ghost switch that could kill all the truck's electronics, making it invisible to any GPS tracker. Every night, they worked in silence, the only communication, the sound of metal being cut and welded, slowly forging the instrument of Miguel's retribution. Vengeance, Miguel discovered, came at a high cost. The modifications to the truck and the acquisition of equipment quickly drained the money from the sale of his house. To finance his operation, he was forced to take on legitimate transport jobs, often on long and dangerous routes that other drivers refused. He pushed himself to the brink of physical and mental exhaustion, sleeping only a few hours a night, his body fueled by strong coffee and the unyielding flame of his fury. Every penny earned was reinvested in his plan. This constant struggle for resources added a layer of desperation and urgency to his mission, proving to himself each day that his determination was stronger than his fatigue and his pain. While Miguel descended into the underworld of preparation, the life of Ricardo El Verdugo Morales continued its course of methodical brutality. The incident with the insignificant trucker had already been forgotten, a minor nuisance in his vast criminal operation. Scenes from his life showed a man who reveled in power, overseeing an execution with the same coldness with which he analyzed a ledger. For him, violence was just a business tool, and fear his most valuable asset. His reputation for invincibility was the cornerstone of his empire. This disconnect between Miguel's obsession and El Verdugo's forgetfulness created a latent tension, the certainty that when Miguel's revenge finally came, the blow would feel much more personal and humiliating. Miguel knew that brute force and a modified truck would not be enough. He needed inside information, a crack in the cartel's wall of silence. His new hunting ground became a decaying, smoky bar on the edge of the city, a known hangout for low-ranking cartel soldiers. Night after night, he sat in a dark corner, slowly sipping a warm beer, becoming a piece of the furniture. He listened to the arrogant, drunken conversations, filtering the bravado for useful fragments of information, names, routes, schedules. It was a dangerous game of patience, where the wrong look or a misplaced question could mean an instant death sentence. It was in this sordid environment that he saw her for the first time, Elena. She was the waitress, moving between tables with a weary efficiency, her face a mask of indifference that couldn't completely hide the fire of resentment in her eyes. Miguel, now a student of human nature forced by necessity, recognized in her the same trapped pain that he felt. He watched her for several nights, noticing how she subtly flinched when one of El Verdugo's henchmen touched her, and the way her gaze lingered on the door after they left. He felt a dangerous connection, an intuition that she, like him, was a prisoner waiting for the right moment to break her chains. The approach was a calculated risk. On a quieter night, when the bar was almost empty, Miguel approached the counter. He didn't speak of plans or revenge. Instead, he spoke in abstractions, in a low, conspiratorial tone, about how the city belonged to men who deserved nothing but misery. "Sometimes," he said, looking at his glass, "a man is pushed so far that the only way left is forward over the bodies of those who pushed him." Elena reacted with immediate hostility, her eyes narrowing. "I don't know what you're talking about, old man. Drink your beer and leave before you get hurt." The rejection was a defense mechanism, but Miguel saw the flicker of interest behind the wall of fear. Elena's hostility was armor forged in the fire of betrayal. She had once been more than a waitress. She had been El Verdugo's protégée and lover. Her intelligence and beauty made her a valuable informant, until a small miscalculation cost the cartel a significant shipment. El Verdugo's punishment was not death, but humiliation. He demoted her to serving drinks to the very men who once feared her, a daily reminder of her failure and her total powerlessness. Trapped by debts and threats against her distant family, Elena lived in a purgatory, her hatred for her former master growing each day, waiting for a weapon, any weapon, to use against him. Realizing that words would not be enough, Miguel changed tactics. The next night, he left a small package on the counter for Elena. Inside was a disposable burner phone, prepaid and untraceable. Along with the phone, a single note, written in trembling letters. "They took my daughter. I will take their money." There was no request, no threat, just a statement of fact, a confession of raw pain. He stood up and left the bar without looking back, leaving the decision entirely in her hands. That act of vulnerability, of sharing his deepest motivation, was the key he hoped could unlock the door of her prison of fear and distrust. The phone rang 3 days later. Elena's voice was tense, hurried. "Are you crazy or are you stupid?" she began. But there was no more hostility, just a nervous urgency. She wasted no time with questions. She provided the information that would change everything. The details of a large cash transport scheduled for the following week. $5 million in cash, being moved from various collection points to a central safe house before crossing the border. She described the route, the type of armored vehicle, and the number of guards. "It's a suicide mission," she whispered before hanging up. "But if you pull it off, send that bastard to hell for me." The line went dead. Miguel now had his weapon. With Elena's information, the planning phase entered its final feverish stage. Javier's workshop became a hive of nightly activity. The final piece of the puzzle was deception. They needed a decoy. Javier used his shady contacts to locate a truck nearly identical to Miguel's. An old, battered model, but one that ran. They spent 2 nights painting and weathering it so that from a distance it would look like Miguel's vehicle. This would be the decoy truck, the centerpiece of the illusion he planned to create. The plan was solidifying, moving from a dream of revenge to a tangible, tactical operation, every detail being reviewed dozens of times. The plan was audacious in its simplicity and complexity. Miguel would intercept the armored vehicle on the remote desert highway Elena had indicated. He wouldn't use firearms, but the brute force of his reinforced truck to disable the vehicle. The transfer of the money to his real truck's hidden compartments had to be done in under 5 minutes. Then the most crucial part would begin. He would drive the decoy truck himself, now loaded with bundles of cut paper to simulate the money. He would lead the chase, which he knew would come in a specific direction away from the real truck, which Javier would drive to a safe hiding place. It was a dangerous dance with many variables. On the eve of the robbery, the weight of his actions finally hit him. Alone in the cab of his truck, the silence of the desert was deafening. Memories of Sophia flooded him, her smile, the sound of her laughter, her dreams of a future he couldn't protect. A torturous doubt gnawed at him. Was this wave of violence really in her name? Would she, who wanted to save lives, approve of the monster he was becoming? For a moment, his determination wavered. He gripped the small portrait of her he kept on the dashboard. its edges worn from his constant touch. Her smiling face brought him no peace, but rather a renewal of his fury. No, this was not justice. It was retribution. It was the only language his enemies would understand. The day of the robbery dawned clear and hot. The tension was a living thing in the air. Positioned in a hidden turnout along the desert highway, Miguel waited. Time dragged on. Then he saw it, the glint of the sun on the windshield of the approaching armored truck. Miguel's heart hammered, but his hands were steady on the wheel. At the exact moment he accelerated, his heavy truck pulling out of its hiding place like a beast of steel. The impact was deafening, a shriek of twisting metal. He gave the guards no time to recover. The precision and speed of his action paralyzed them with fear. It was exactly as he had planned, a brutal and efficient execution. Using an industrial crowbar and the strength born of desperation, he forced open the back doors of the armored truck. The two guards inside were stunned, disarmed by the sheer audacity and speed of the attack. They looked at Miguel's silent figure, his face obscured by shadow, and they didn't see a thief, but a spectre, an executioner. He didn't say a word. Silence was his most effective weapon. In less than 4 minutes, the heavy canvas bags full of money were transferred to the hidden compartments of his truck, which Javier had already positioned nearby. The job was done. The first phase of the plan was a flawless success. The news of the robbery landed. Like a bombshell at El Verdugo's headquarters, $5 million was a significant loss, but not a crippling one. What enraged him was the offense, the absolute humiliation, such a clean, professional robbery in his territory. His underlings were terrified, stammering excuses. It was then that a detail caught his attention, the aggressor truck abandoned at the crime scene. The description made him remember the trucker, the insignificant one who dared to say no. The realization transformed his anger into a glacial obsession. This wasn't a robbery, it was a personal declaration of war. He mobilized all his resources, all his informants with a single order: find the ghost trucker. The hunt began. Miguel, now driving the decoy truck, became the most wanted prey in Baja California. The name El Fantasma began to be whispered on trucker radios and in the alleys of Tijuana. El Verdugo flooded the roads with his men, setting up roadblocks and scouring gas stations. But Miguel had the advantage of a lifetime on those roads. He used dirt tracks that weren't on the maps, smugglers' trails that snaked through the mountains, always staying one step ahead of his pursuers. The chase became a deadly game of chess on a massive scale. One man's intelligence against the unlimited resources of a crime empire. The net tightened at a godforsaken gas station in the middle of nowhere. 2 cars with cartel men cornered him as he was refueling. There was nowhere to run. Panic threatened to take over, but it was replaced by an icy clarity. Thinking fast, he accidentally spilled a large puddle of diesel on the ground near one of the pumps. As the men got out of their cars, guns in hand, Miguel threw his lit lighter into the puddle. The combustion was instantaneous, creating a wall of fire and black smoke. In the confusion and chaos, he sped off, the decoy truck's tires screeching as it disappeared into a cloud of dust, leaving chaos and screaming men behind. It was in that moment, with the adrenaline still pumping, that Miguel's strategy fundamentally changed. Fleeing wasn't enough. Surviving wasn't a victory. Victory would be the total humiliation of El Verdugo. He needed to control the end of the game. A bold idea formed in his mind, one that would transform the prey into the hunter. He wouldn't be found. He would let himself be found, but on his own terms. In that moment of clarity, he understood the power he held. Many give up when they're cornered, but you have to. Remember that sometimes, to truly win, you have to stop running and start setting your own trap. If this message of taking control of your own destiny makes sense to you, consider subscribing to support more stories of resilience. He needed a human bait. Miguel remembered an old contact, a low-level informant named Rico who worked at the port, a bitter man who hated the cartel as much as he feared it. Using a burner phone, Miguel contacted him. The offer was simple, a share of the money that would make him a rich man in exchange for a single piece of information. He was to betray Miguel, calling El Verdugo's men and revealing the ghost trucker's location. He gave Rico the exact coordinates, a huge abandoned scrapyard near the U.S. border. Rico, seeing a chance to escape his miserable life, agreed with a mixture of greed and dread. The final stage was being set. Miguel drove the decoy truck with its cargo of worthless paper to the heart of the labyrinth of rusted metal that was the scrapyard. The place was a ghost town of car carcasses and forgotten machinery, the perfect setting for his final act. With the precision of a demolitions expert, he positioned the truck near several old fuel tanks, still full of flammable vapors. He connected a simple detonator to a car battery, a long wire stretching to a vantage point on a pile of crushed cars. He was no longer running, he was hunting. And El Verdugo, blinded by arrogance and a desire for revenge, was walking straight into the center of the web. Night began to fall over the scrapyard, the shadows stretching like hungry fingers between the piles of twisted metal. El Verdugo's arrival was exactly as Miguel had predicted, arrogant and loud. A convoy of black pickups and SUVs raised clouds of dust as it entered the yard, headlights cutting through the darkness. Armed men with rifles jumped out, spreading out with brutal efficiency, treating the labyrinth of junk as their personal domain. El Verdugo stepped out of his armored vehicle, not with the urgency of a hunter, but with the calm of an executioner about to carry out a sentence. He remained near the cars, savoring what he believed was the inevitable end of his hunt, the scent of victory already in the air. From his observation nest, hidden atop a pile of crushed cars, Miguel watched every move. His heart beat a steady rhythm, a terrifying calm having taken hold of him. He saw El Verdugo's men converge on the decoy truck, their weapons aimed, surrounding it like wolves around a wounded prey. El Verdugo gave a hand signal, the order for the final assault. At that precise instant, as the first sicario touched the handle of the truck's door, Miguel closed the circuit. The explosion was cataclysmic. The fuel tanks, filled with volatile vapors, detonated in a colossal fireball that lit up the yard like a demonic sun, tearing through the night and launching a shower of incandescent metal in all directions. The shockwave threw El Verdugo violently to the ground. For a moment the world became a chaos of sound and fury, his ears ringing with the roar of the explosion. Stunned, he got up, parts of his designer clothes on fire, his eyes focused on the burning carcass of the truck. It was then that he saw it. Amidst the flames, a few fake bills, bundles of cut paper, floated into the air before being consumed by the fire. The real money was never there. The realization hit him harder than the blast. He had been lured into a trap. The hunt was a sham. The humiliation in front of his surviving men was a deeper wound than any bullet could inflict. As hell raged below, Miguel did not feel the wave of euphoria he had expected. Looking at the destruction, at the fire consuming his decoy, he saw a reflection of his own soul. He had become that which he hunted, a force of blind destruction driven by hatred. In that moment of clarity amidst the chaos, he understood that killing El Verdugo would not bring Sofia back, nor would it silence the echoes of his loss. The real revenge was not to take his enemy's life, but to destroy what he valued most, his aura of power, his reputation for invincibility. Letting him live with the shame, broken in the eyes of his own empire, was a more lasting and meaningful punishment. Taking advantage of the absolute disarray, Miguel began his escape. The dense black smoke was his cloak, the sound of secondary explosions and the screams of wounded men his camouflage. He moved with the silent agility of a predator, no longer the prey. He slipped through the shadows of the junk labyrinth, each step deliberate and sure, a stark contrast to the anarchy he had left behind. The sirens of police and firefighters began to wail in the distance, a sound that once represented danger but was now the soundtrack to his liberation, adding another layer of confusion that would seal his escape route. He didn't look back. His focus was entirely on the approaching border fence. At the edge of the scrapyard, with freedom just a few yards away, he paused. He allowed himself one last look at the battlefield he had created. Through the smoke and flames, he saw the silhouette of El Verdugo. He was no longer the imposing figure from before, but a diminished man, shouting orders that were lost in the noise, his authority evaporated in the heat of the blast. This image of the all-powerful kingpin reduced to impotence was Miguel's reward. It was the climax of his journey, the mental photograph he would carry with him. This was his decisive action, the final act that not only guaranteed his survival, but also cemented his revenge in humiliation, not in blood. With that last look, Miguel turned his back on Tijuana, on Mexico, on his life of pain. He cut the fence and disappeared into the darkness of the border, a true ghost dissolving into the night. His journey of vengeance was complete, not with the bang of a gunshot, but with the roar of a purifying fire that exposed the fragility of a power that seemed absolute. He didn't just steal the cartel's money, he stole their fear. Sometimes the greatest statement you can make is not to shout the loudest, but to show everyone that the emperor, after all, has no clothes. If you believe in the power of an individual to challenge a broken system, your subscription helps keep that flame of hope alive, sharing more stories like this. The flames in the scrapyard eventually died out, but the fire of Ricardo El Verdugo, Morales's humiliation, would burn forever. The story of his spectacular defeat spread like a virus within the organization. The loss of the money was insignificant compared to the loss of his most precious asset, the aura of fear he had cultivated with such sadism. His rivals within the cartel used the incident to undermine his authority, painting him not as a victim of a brilliant adversary, but as an incompetent fool who was outsmarted by a simple trucker. El Verdugo wasn't killed, but his career was. He was slowly marginalized, becoming a pathetic figure, a ghost haunted not by Miguel, but by his own shattered arrogance, a living proof that absolute power can be dismantled by a single spark of vengeance. As the figure of El Verdugo diminished, the legend of the ghost trucker grew exponentially. In dusty truck stops, in roadside bars, and in the kitchens of Tijuana's oppressed neighborhoods, the story was told in whispers. Each retelling added a new layer of myth. They said he could walk through walls, that his truck left no tracks. The truth, as always, was less fantastic, but the symbol was more powerful. Miguel Rodríguez, the man, had disappeared, but El Fantasma became an archetype of resistance. To the powerless, he was a folk hero. To the cartel, a cautionary tale, an uncomfortable reminder that there was a limit to oppression and that sometimes an ordinary man, when he has nothing left to lose, becomes the most dangerous force of all. The echoes of Miguel's actions brought a quiet end for those who helped him. Javier, with the generous share of the money Miguel left for him in an arranged hiding spot, closed his mechanic shop overnight. He took his family and moved south, to a quiet town where no one knew his name, finally buying the peace that the cartel's money could never give him. Elena also disappeared. The morning after the fire at the scrapyard, she didn't show up for work at the bar. No one ever saw her again. She used the chaos as cover. For her own escape, her revenge complete. Miguel's actions, born from a personal loss, created ripples that allowed others to find their own liberation, a small legacy of hope amidst his tragic story. Months later, in a sun-drenched fishing village somewhere on the Pacific coast of South America, a man known to the locals as Roberto sat at a simple cafe, looking out at the ocean. It was Miguel, His face was more weathered, not by the sun, but by a permanent sadness that not even time could erase. He was safe, anonymous, financially stable for the rest of his days. He had won, he had survived, but the victory was hollow. He watched families laughing on the beach, fishing boats returning with the day's catch, and felt a profound disconnect, as if he were watching life through a pane of glass. He had escaped his hunters, but there was no escaping the memory of Sofia. The end of Miguel's journey did not bring him peace, only silence. He fulfilled the promise he made to himself on the floor of his daughter's room, delivering a poetic and devastating revenge. But justice, he discovered, was a form of poison that killed both the executioner and the victim. He was free, but his freedom was a solitary prison, built with the walls of his own pain. The vast ocean before him was a mirror of his soul, an infinite empty expanse. The legend of the trucker who defied the cartel would live forever, but the man behind it was condemned to live with the ghost of who he was, and the daughter he could never embrace again. The loss, in the end, was eternal.